Hey guys, so today we'll be dealing with objects. We'll be learning what are objects in JavaScript, objects in JavaScript. So what are objects in JavaScript? A very good example to use here would be considering objects in real life. Um, so let's take a book for an instance. A book is an object in the real world. A book has an author, pages, book colors. Then it also has properties you can act on. You can read a book. You can delete a book just using like ebooks. You can delete the book. You can view the author of the book and some other features. Similar constructs can be used in JavaScript, right? You can create JavaScript objects to encapsulate certain or emulate certain real life objects, and they function similarly. And basically, objects are basically large parts in JavaScript. Even that JavaScript itself is an object-oriented language, so you might already have been using objects you do not already know of. Things like array, maths, and some other things are basic and native JavaScript objects. So let's get right into it. How to create an object. Like almost everything in JavaScript, there are several ways to create an object. But I would show you two methods, the two popular method. I would start with the least popular, then move on to the most popular method. The least popular method would probably be this using the new keyword. Okay, constant. Let's use something like book, book, and um, let's say new. More the same way you initialize an array objects, new objects. Then come to book and give it book.author. Then the dot notation is got to Anthony. Book.name got to the story of my life. I can now come here and console logbook. Console book. And you should see this author Anthony name, story of my life. This is one method of creating an object, and you most likely won't be using it a lot. The most popular method of creating an object is using the object notation, object literal notation, yes, which is basically this constant. It's called so curly brackets, right? And I come here and start name is called to the title. Instead of name, let me use title. Goes by moonlight. Goes by moonlight, yeah. Author. Um, points. And let's give the pages. Oh, 100. So now I've created a book object that has a title, an author, and the number of pages in it. Right? Let's say you want this read. So you can also create functions. Like a book can take in functions that it can call. Um, let's do this. Okay. I'm looking for the function that I would use. Rowing author. Number of number of pages to the log is but page. Okay. So there are multiple ways that I could have written this. I could have written this as number of page, then function. In the this would work. The other method I used before would work. If I should console log this book. I mean, I have some things that I would have to explain here concerning this keyword and some other stuff. But let's first console log this book and see what it gives us. Okay. So that's if I wanted to check probably book the title of the book, I would just come here and do console log book dot title. That should give me the book's title. Tales by Moonlight. I wanted to check the author. Come here, books dot author. That will give me commit. Probably I wanted to change a property in the book, page property. Would come here and page is equal to 300. When I console log page, to get 300 instead of 900 that it initially gave us. I should comment this out. You should get 900. All right. Let me call this. I want to find out the console log this. I want to find out the number of pages. So I do books. The number of page. Let's see. Okay. So I call it like a normal function and gives us 900. So when we are creating functions, I think I mentioned something about various ways of creating functions, and I mentioned this keyword. You can't use this keyword. Like you can't use arrow functions here, right? Because of the way this keyword are scoped in arrow functions. If I was to create a function like this and I did something like this wouldn't work because this keyword would be pointing towards the Windows this thing, the Windows property. So a good example would let me just show you console log this log this, and I'll change this back to it. Initial formats. This would work. All right. Because I'm using CodePen, it can't log this, preventing me from logging the Windows property. But if I was to log this within this number of pages, at least that should work and show me the property. It should scope its own objects. So the object is going to be, it's not going to be scoping the Windows object now, it's going to be scoping the object in which it's nested inside. So in which the function is being called. But if I was to use an arrow function, it will scope the point in which it's being called from. So I'm calling it in the Windows object. So it's going to scope the Windows object. But in this place, when I'm using the function keyword, creating the function normally without the arrow function, this will be scoped within the objects that it was created in. So that's something you have to remember. I think that's about it for objects. The very popular object that exists is the math object, in which most of you guys might be using it already. Some of you might not. But the math object is an inbuilt JavaScript object. I most likely um, should have used my console instead of CodePen for this. But let's see, the math object should be, let's console log the math object and see what it gives us. Look, okay, math is not a function. The math object gives us basically an empty object, which should not be. Let's say pi. All right, so the math object is an inbuilt collection of um, math functions that JavaScript comes inbuilt with some other objects. We have the date object that provides the dates. Right now, we did math.py, which would give us in the console the value of pi. We have math.floor, math.round, math. Math.decimal. Like you can, I've forgotten round to, float to. I've forgotten the properties of the math objects, but there are a lot, like quite a lot. To do a lot of maths, they literally help you do a lot of math calculations, and they are inbuilt with JavaScript together with the date objects and some other objects which I've forgotten. I most likely should. You can Google this and find out the inbuilt JavaScript objects. Date objects can be used to get the time, the date, and some other stuff. Okay. And that's basically it for objects. Objects are actually very powerful if you know how to use them properly. You can actually do quite a lot with it. In the curriculum, yes, values and reference. So in JavaScript, we have two types of type: reference types and primitive types. Example of primitive types are strings, numbers, booleans, and reference types these are primitive types. Reference types are arrays, objects, functions. I think functions should be among. So that's reference types. Okay. Yep. Um. So what's the difference between a primitive type and a reference type? Should this arrow keep on popping? Primitive is the way they are being stored, like in memory. The way JavaScript saves strings, numbers, and boolean. Basically, the way this save primitive type is different from the way they save reference types. When they're saving reference, if I could draw, or if I had a diagram, it could have been better. But I would have to show you with like examples. Basically, the way they save primitive type is different from the way they save reference type. So let's do it. Let's no go to 5. Then let's num2 go to num. So what I did here was create a variable num and assigned it to a primitive type 5. Then I created a another variable num2 and assigned it to the variable I first created. So if I should come here and do num is equal to 10, um, what would happen to num2? Would it equal to 10 or would it equal to 5? Given that num2 is pointing to num, I think I should call this num1, given that I've called that num2. Given that num2 is pointing to num1, what would happen? So let's console.log num2, see what it gives us. And it gives us 5. Okay, then let's console.log num1 and see what it is. So num1 gives us 10 and num2 gives us 5, even though num2 is pointing to num1. And that's because of the way JavaScript saves stores primitive types. Basically, primitive types are saved on are stored on what is known as the stack in JavaScript. Why reference types are stored on heaps. The stack is basically it's easier for the program, like the processor, to access the stack than it is to access the heap. And so when you create like a primitive type and you assign something to it, it does this thing. It creates another. So what happened here was it did not point. This created another value in this on the stack and pointed and assigned it to two instead of pointing directly. It just copied the value of a primitive type. When you assign like a number to it, assign a variable to a primitive type, it literally just copied it. So if you change number one, it does not really affect the other because it's just a copy. So nothing is being changed. But this behavior is different when you're using um, reference types like objects and array. So I'll still use num1 and let's convert num1 to let's see. Let me create an object here and give it name. Okay, let me use book one, and book2. Right. So name is called to Dan. Title. Oh, I have to change this because of okay. Let me use author. Title is equal to the beginning of the end. Come. Mm, mm. Okay. So console log book one and book two. You get your Dan. It should. I've not changed anything yet. So probably I come here and do book. one dot author equate it to John. This thing could happen now. As you can see, both book one and book two, the author has been changed to John. Because now, when you're dealing with reference types, things like arrays and objects and the rest, JavaScript does not copy. It does not create a copy when you point. So these reference types are saved on the heap. And when you point an object to a variable that is like a reference type, instead of creating a copy, it just takes this book two and it points it to the same location of where it is in memory. So this book one and this book two is they are both pointing to the same object, right? Because this object has been saved somewhere in the memory, and that memory is on the heap, and they are pointing to the same objects. So if you change these objects, it's going to affect both of them since they are pointing to one object. Unlike primitive type that are saved on the M stack, when you point, it just creates a copy. It views the value of the objects you are pointing to, then creates a copy. So it does not really change. Why for reference types they do change. Let me even confirm all the reference types in the JavaScript. Types JavaScript coming. Okay, array functions object here. And primitive types are usually number boolean strings, if I'm correct, or if I remember properly. And with that, I think we come to the end of objects in general. So next we have loops, and that's what we'll be treating in the next video.